We are continuing to cover the industry of Bitcoin treasury companies. It's a new phenomenon, at least in the Europe and in the Nordics, and we are happy to have as our guest Sander Andersen. Welcome, Sander.
Hey, Morten. Great to see you again.
Yeah, last time it was in Helsinki, I think, in person, but we have been talked several times online. And you are right now the chairman of the board in H100. You have been the CEO for 6 or 7 months, and you are the CEO of FinPers in Switzerland. And but you are Norwegian, so you have a global overview, I would think. So we maybe could start to go back into your founder's history, because you founded the company already in 2016, which was inspired by some interest you have in health. It was called Entire Body. And what was the business idea of that company?
So, not everyone knows that I spent most of my childhood as a professional swimmer. And I was on the national team of Norway most of my career. And that also meant that I always had a lot of people around me and coaches to support me. And performance has always like been a big part of my life. And when I ended my career after the Nordic Championship when I was 17, I actually founded my first company. That was even before Entire Body in the health space. And what I learned after that period, after end career, is that like when you are an adult, you don't have much supporters around you anymore. And especially when it comes to health, we saw back then a big interest in personal trainers and like helping you, but no one had really taken the digitalized exercise and nutrition coaching concept to the Nordics on scale. So Entire Body was established to create a platform where people with health knowledge, personal trainers, nutritionists, and we gave them the infrastructure to deliver their services to their clients. So it's all about making like a very manual process into a more efficient structure project and ecosystem for them to deliver their services. And I did that from 2016 to 2021.
Yeah, and as part of that journey, you also checked out whether you should do your next startup in the Baltics, or where was the best environment to start a new startup. But you ended up in Switzerland, and why did you do that?
So I think since most of the online coaching business was online and on social media, I found crypto back in 2017. And after 4 years, I spent at least equally amount of time on crypto as I did within health. So I decided, okay, maybe I need to do something else. So I sold some of my shares. I took a year off. And one of the things I've always been quite fan of, based on also my knowledge and experience from sport, is that you need the right environment. And back then, even before 2020, even before COVID, if it wasn't for COVID, I would probably left Norway during that period. And as you rightly said, we started a company in the Baltics, in Estonia, which was a fantastic learning experience to see how a small country can produce so many unicorns. So, and I actually was in Estonia when the COVID breakout, so I had to jump on a plane, so I was not stuck in Estonia. So I've always looked for where's the best environment for me, my family, and what I'm doing. And when it comes to going into the crypto industry, and what I looked quite deeply into was tokenization back then, especially tokenization of like securities. Then it was really like just one country out of Europe that had a clear regulatory framework, and that was Switzerland. And so I decided to start the new company, Finpeers, out of Switzerland due to the regulatory environment, but also like where I felt it was the culture, and where you basically found the culture fit for doing this type of projects, and especially around family offices. And then we ended with Switzerland.
Yeah, and then your idea with FinPairs, what was that? I think it was about private equity, democratization of private equity. Could you tell me a little more about the business idea then?
Yeah, so when we started FinPairs, our thesis was most of the value creation in the world, especially in the financial world, happened in the private market. It was not very easily accessible for most people. So it was really like figuring out a way of giving access to more people to the asset class that gave the most value. And private equity had for 2 decades been outperforming most others asset classes. So what we looked into was how could we like tokenized access, taking an illiquid asset to make it liquid, so more people can get access. And we went quite deep into that. We found a lot of problems around tokenization, especially around liquidity, where we can maybe come back to.
Yeah, and in the beginning, it wasn't necessarily focused on Bitcoin, but after some time, you moved more and more into the Bitcoin way of thinking, and you have also sort of invented a phrase called Bitcoin equity. And why did you go that way in your journey, and what do you define by the Bitcoin equity today?
So the reason why we pivoted, first of all, we've been big fan of Bitcoin for a long period of time, but we saw it as a buy and hold asset for that was it. But private equity and private market investment, we got a lot of insights on how you are actually using financial architecture to create products, where you combine a little bit of depth and also acquiring assets, restructuring assets in a smart way. That was one of the reasons why that sector was so successful. But we quickly also saw that there were so many gatekeepers in that industry. It wasn't really like open for newcomers. But on the other side, where we had a niche that we could explore was, okay, how can you take the amazing asset, best performing assets in the world, a Bitcoin, and create something more out of it, more than just store of value, but also looking more deeply into it on the side of Bitcoin as collateral, and more importantly, how you actively manage an asset like that. And then we went deep down into the rabbit hole. We found us quite confident that most of the financial markets will eventually evolve on top of Bitcoin, because that's the reason why US is so popular, since they have had a strong currency, and the only alternative to that, how we see it, is Bitcoin, and therefore Bitcoin needs an industry around it and actively using it, and it will open up for different risk appetite around allocation to the Bitcoin commodity. And that's when we started to do a lot of research, and we went deeper down into the rabbit hole on how to create what we defined then as the Bitcoin equity industry, where you combined the most prestige collateral in the world with revenue generating on top. And I think we are very early still, but I think Bitcoin Treasury companies is phase one out of it. I think we will now see after the first wave how different players will play this game and create long-term shareholder value for their owners.
And what we and maybe many other observators was waiting for was the next step from fintech and no, from finpairs, I mean, and then something else happened because it arose, H100 arose as a really, really amazing company noted in Sweden. But there was a backstory there. Half a year before you were the CEO, there was a mention that you would be the CEO in January 2025. But even before that, in the autumn of 2024, there was sort of a remote merger into a company that eventually became H100, and a couple of Norwegians like Christian Lundqvist, Jonathan Raknes, and also, of course, some Swedes in the existing company was part of this redefinition of the company. Were you part of that redefinition already from the autumn 2024? You should maybe think of it like that if you think about the tempo that you were able to roll out when it came to 2025. But tell me.
I mean, I think most, like if you dig down into the history, you find that Entire Body is the company we merged into that company. So I founded Entire Body back in 2016. It was an asset I had hold for many years, and I thought that was a good asset to do a reverse merger with a Swedish publicly listed company, and eventually see if that could be a Bitcoin accumulation vehicle. And so I worked very closely with Christian on that, and we teamed up with a few people from Sweden to see how we can structure it from a regulatory perspective. Then the original idea was, okay, how could we use a combination of capital raising and M&A to build and increase value of the existing company we had within the health sector. So I had thought about and looked into that for many years. I started looking at strategy. It took me quite a while to understand, okay, is it only these zombie companies that do this for, I would say, an inflation hedge? But when MetaPlanet started, I saw, okay, this is going to happen in every market. And back then, when we started working on this project, it wasn't any European Bitcoin Treasury companies. We weren't able to be the first in Europe, but we were the first in at least Sweden. Some will also argue that we are the first in the Nordics. Yeah, so I was very much involved from day one. FinPeers was like big part of the origination of the company itself, the strategy, and more importantly also the investors that we brought in that we have had a long-term relationship with.
Yeah, and one of them is Adam Back. So what's the history about this relationship, and what kind of trust and value does he bring to the table?
So I met Adam a few years ago through some of the partners we have in Fin on the cap table of FinPeers, and we have since then talked back and forth about different ideas around Bitcoin equity, and also more recently the big opportunity within Bitcoin Treasury companies. And I just asked him if he wanted to join, and he said yes, and he was of course very happy about that. And since then he has been a very important supporter of the company. In some of the rounds, the lead investor. He owns a significant portion of our company, and we work with him on a regular basis. And he has been in Bitcoin forever, and he is like, but he also has this he has this mind where he can see new opportunities, and I think that's what's unique with him. And we are able to tap into his brain sometimes and get some advice and share our ideas with him, which of course has been a huge asset for the company and still are for us.
And then you had the relationship, you had the ideas, did some analytics, you found a vehicle that you and your colleagues and friends and investors could use, and then you just pushed on the gas. So how has this road been. It's really sort of a flywheel and happening all the time from the launch and until just some weeks ago. Yep.
Yeah, I think we created a plan and we stick to that plan very early. We decided to not share much because we knew what we had, and it was just all about execution, and it still are. From zero to 1,000 Bitcoin was one important milestone because I think after that, that's when the journey is starting. It can be quite tough before you reach a critical size, and we saw that critical size as 1,000 Bitcoin. And from here on, it's like how do you create like scalable systems that can really scale and make the common stock a globally accessible investment that we see building a relationship with investors all around the world, which is part of the Bitcoin ethos that we do this globally. And that was very important for us, that we think that the common stock in H100 is a stock that everyone in the world should be able to buy. But on the other side, it's a lot of local products where we can win with the current balance sheets we have.
So, as I understand it, you sort of define it in two phases, 1,000 BTC, and then you are even talking about 10x that amount. Is that really the vision?
Yeah, at least everything we do now is to how we can scale 10x from here. And that is true from like how we fundraise, and what type of partners we are looking for, how we have structured organization to be really focused on deal making and understand asset play here. And we thought that this is the time to breathe and plan the next step of the company, and really do the same acceleration one more time, but it requires a significant amount of money and significant relationship building with big pockets of money, and they require a little bit different structures, and that's what we plan for now, and what we basically have worked on the last few weeks.
Yeah, and you have strengthened your organization with a special person responsible for Bitcoin strategy, and you are now chairman of the board. Another guy is CEO. So the organization is, of course, one part of it to prepare. But what kind of investments and funding will this phase be a part of? Is it different? Because maybe the first phase was more retail investors and hedge fund.
So most of our investors today has been family offices,
Okay.
and we don't see that change much, and but we hope that we will get more liquidity in the stock so we can use more ATM type of programs, but also like how to build investment products that can absorb 100 million, 200 million is basically where we spend a lot of time now to understand how do they like to invest, in what type of vehicle, what type of structure, equity, debt, Bitcoin denominated, fiat denominated. And we think all of them are the answers, and that therefore also having multiple products in the market where you just not only ride the momentum and tapping into the people you have in your contact list, you also need to be building relationship and trust way quicker when it's so much at stake as it is for us right now.
And you have been traveling around for sort of a roadshow or connecting people in the States for a couple of weeks. And what does that have learned you compared to the European or Nordic experience when it comes to investment culture? Maybe that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think all countries and investment cultures are on a little bit different path. Like I think in Europe we have a lot of Bitcoiners, um, but in because of Michael Saylor, the corporate layer of Bitcoin is more popularized, And that is true for private investors, but also investment banks. You see this doing a lot of digital asset treasury companies. You fill them with Ethereum and Solana and whatever. And of course, also like a lot of Bitcoin treasury companies. So what we saw in the US was how far ahead they are and what type of speed they require. And we was actually a little bit shocked about how big this industry can be when all these forces are pushing in the right direction. And that includes all the big financial institutions, all the big investors. They have a relationship to Bitcoin, and especially also a relationship with the corporate layer of Bitcoin. Of course, good and bad. It's not that everyone is thinking it's a good idea, but it's been on most people's desk, and they have looked into it, and they have a clear view of how this will develop. Which means more shorters, more investors. It's a much more dynamic market. And we think maybe the Nordics are lagging a few years back, because we know when the Nordics sees it, they will take it very quickly. But right now, we are quite far behind, and we want to use that as an opportunity to build at a scale before we see more players coming in, and especially the bigger money coming in. We want to be the preferred company that the big money in the Nordics want to allocate to. And therefore, we will spend more time on education. We will spend more time basically pitching multiple times to this bigger institutions, even if now they think we are, I don't know, they are lots of skepticism. But I think that will turn, and when it turns, it's going to be a completely different market also in the Nordics, because we know the Nordics has a lot of has a long history of commodities and asset types of play. That's Nordics big in real estate, oil, energy, and I think the same will happen here. We can't forget that Norway was bold when they thought oil was a good thing. And back then, we didn't knew all the functions of oil and how that would create in modern society in many ways. And I think we are now seeing the same type of infrastructure and impact with Bitcoin, but very few people understand what it can be.
Okay, and then you have gone from Oslo to the Baltics to Switzerland. You have been visiting the States, but your company is listed in Sweden, and a lot of the shareholders are also from Norway. What do you think about the Nordic markets? Is it a good market to be in? Right now, there are 12 Bitcoin treasury companies in the Nordics. So it seems to be an interesting space, and you are, of course, heading it far ahead of the other ones.
Yeah, I think the Nordics has all the right infrastructure. I mean, we have a lot of Bitcoin holders. Most people understand that the society will be digital, and I think also the history around commodities will help accelerate this industry from a institutionalized side of things. And I think Sweden is the right place to be. The main stock exchange there is Nasdaq, and of course makes it easier to do a dual listing in the US when you are at a critical size. And they also have the most active retail market in the Nordics, and many will argue that it's actually started to compete with other European countries. And if we look at the innovation index and new companies spinning out, Sweden is on top of a lot of those lists, very closely with Switzerland. And that's what we try to do, to take the knowledge we basically breathe every day here in Switzerland, and also take back the knowledge we get when we are traveling back into the Nordics, because at the end of the day, I'm Norwegian, and I believe that the country is in doing the completely wrong thing on how they support innovation, but that doesn't mean that we should give up. That doesn't mean that that can change. And I think the new generation with that are internet native, they will see different opportunities going forward. And I hope we will see a younger political scene at one point where someone is willing to do the change. And for me, it's important to not give up, and especially when it's still hope. And I think in Sweden, it's still a lot of hope.
But in Sweden, there has been a lot of criticism that, for instance, crypto companies or blockchain companies, they have difficulties in getting a bank. I think that 10 of the 11 members of the Swedish Blockchain Association don't have a Swedish bank. And you also even have the Swedish financial authorities. Every second or every third month, they go out and say that you should be careful. But is the financial community so strong that's the main point for you guys? So it doesn't matter whether there are some negative talks about Bitcoin in other agendas?
I think that's exactly the right time to invest. When the criticism is there, but we still see it's a lot of buyers and it's a lot of people that holds Bitcoin. And even if the strongest voice still are on the negative side of things, we believe that this is exactly the time you want to push and establish a Nordic flagship, and that hopefully will open the eyes up that, okay, why is all these international investors investing into this Swedish company? And we already have very good conversations with banks, with the stock exchange. So I'm not as negative as many others. I think it takes time. They still think that centralized control is the thing. But we will see what will win at the end of the day. I think doing stuff is how you change things, and we think Nordics have done that in many ways before, so I don't understand why we shouldn't do it again, even if we have some challenges right now.
Okay, a question which is maybe a more sober one, because you have been rising as with the flywheel, but in the last weeks there have been some uphills. There has been a decline in the prices, and that is independently of the development of the Bitcoin as such. How do you explain it? Are people getting tired of this vision? Are they thinking that this was a short winning melody, but not a long-term melody?
I think how do you price those companies are quite hard to understand for people, especially if you're not living on a Bitcoin standard, because then you're measuring everything in fiat. And I think I'm convinced that the main purpose of a Bitcoin treasury company is to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible and increasing Bitcoin per share over time. And H100 has done that since we started. So if you want to have allocation to a company that are actively working to increase Bitcoin per share and therefore also increase your Bitcoin stack on a regular basis, then Bitcoin treasury companies can be something for you. So I think the trend is international. It's not only H100. It started with strategy, then MetaPlanet, then Smarter Web Company, Capital B, and it eventually came to us as well. So I think we have seen what we call in the industry an mNav compression over the last three months. And I think that's partly, it's two reasons for that. One is back in, let's say, May, a lot of companies started. I think most of the Swedish one actually started around May. And a lot of them, locally and internationally, they promised a lot. So back then it was enough to say, we want to do a Bitcoin treasury strategy, we buy 4 Bitcoin. That was the same that we did. So companies bought like 4, 6, 7, 15 Bitcoin. and the stock price rise like 100%. So totally irrational, but it was a new investment opportunity that quite a lot of excitement, and many people speculating when is Bitcoin moving as well. So you have all these dynamics, and a lot of people believed in that story, and then it was a lot of promises, and eventually very few companies delivered, locally and internationally. A lot of companies say, hey, we want to do like X amount of fundraising, and they signed these LOIs, they did so many things, and eventually a lot of these companies never bought any Bitcoin, or they bought very few. So in that case, a lot of people lost money, and are probably quite stuck in those investments because they have no real plan of accumulating more Bitcoin over time. So I think that was like part of the reason, and the mNav skyrocketed, like was like 10, 15 times underlying value. And that you can adjust if you're able to capture up with that premium with rapid fundraising and ensure that Bitcoin per share increasing quite rapidly. Like H100 delivered 262% Bitcoin yield in Q3. And then we'll see what we are going to do in Q4. But we are not going to stop doing this. We don't have... we have two separate teams, one on the operational side and another one on Bitcoin side. And on the Bitcoin side, it's very clear that we are going to stack more Bitcoin. So I think that over-promising, under-delivering has, of course, affected the industry. Then we have seen a lot of structured pipes, at least in the US, where was a little bit of, I would say, like wrong dynamics, where the pipe was maybe 99% of the total shares. So only 1% traded, and that 1% traded way above NAV. And when all the stocks came out in the market, of course, some investors saw the opportunity to sell for a profit. So I would say we are very early in this industry. I think everyone is rapidly doing mistakes, trying to figuring out how to do this in the best way. But I'm convinced that most of these Bitcoin Treasury companies deserves a premium, one for their fundraising short term, which will not happen forever, where you take this finite supply of fiat and put it into a fixed supply asset, which has enormous potential, maybe to even change the whole financial system. So if you believe in that story, that's a trade you should do. So yeah, I would say that's a lot of over-promising and under-delivering. And the second thing is, how do you value these things?
What is your main KPI then?
So our KPI is how fast are you able to grow Bitcoin per share? And if you're able to use that premium to create financial products to different types of investors with different types of investment appetite, you will eventually increase Bitcoin per share, and that should be rewarded one way or another. And that is true for most commodity management companies. Banks trades above book value, asset managers trades above book value, and that is true for oil and gas, energy, and shipping.
Okay, but in the next phase then, will it be the same type of KPI that you will focus on also when you're growing 10x?
Yes.
Okay. And in that regard, you have defined a plan, which you have called Operation Svalbard in 21 points, I think, and not every one of them are public yet. You are releasing them one by one. But what is this plan, and what is it supposed to deliver?
So what we have learned over the last seven months is communication is key, and I think the market really understood that we wanted to do 1,000 Bitcoin quickly. It was actually like a Nordic race to 1,000 Bitcoin, because a lot of them talked about how to achieve 1,000 Bitcoin. But after that, like what now? So what we wanted to do was to create a new plan, which is only until late January next year. But we have 21 steps that we also use as our internal guideline for how to create shareholder value over the next 3-4 months. So it's a new way of being completely transparent with our community of what we want to do and how we are going to create shareholder value for them.
And then it would end up, as I understand, as a gathering or event or whatever you call it in Svalbard. So then people are going to experience, they are not sitting in a meeting room in Svalbard and talking about Bitcoin all the time, are they?
No, so we have the health element of the company, and I think what we also have learned in the organization is that the clarity of mind and removement of doubt is one of the key things to do in a fast-growing environment like this. So the whole gathering is to connect investors and leaders in the space to be together, pitch black in Svalbard, no sun, doing experiences that are very raw, something that triggers your consciousness and how to really experience the world. And we think that is going to create a very unique environment where people, investors and industry leaders connect and have great discussions on how this industry is going to move forward. And we think it's going to be a different type of conference with only a few people together for a few days.
Won't you even be able to see the Northern Lights at that time of the year?
Hopefully we will.
Or you have to find a Northern Star, whatever, Sander. Thank you very much, then, and we look forward to follow your journey further. These 10 years back to the founding of your first companies after you finished your swimming career. Have you imagined this kind of journey?
I just try to do my job every day. I think the consequences. I love what I do. I think that's very important. And I realize that you will always have a set of problems, and I think I prefer a life with harder problems. And I just like to wake up in the morning, and I like to push through the hard days, and that makes life meaningful.
Thank you very much again, then, Sander.
Thank you, Morten. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode from Kuiper. If you enjoyed the conversation, subscribe to the Future of Finance podcast, available both on-chain and on your favorite platforms. And remember, Future of Finance isn't just a podcast. Sign up for your newsletter to get news, deep dives, and insights, and to be the first to know when new podcast episodes drop. Stay connected with us and never miss an update.